My granddaughter hasn't eaten hardly anything since she came back from college. Grandma, I'm sorry, I'm just not hungry. Night after night, her plate remained untouched, until one day, when my son-in-law wasn't around, the girl quietly walked into my room. Grandma, the truth is, her voice was shaking. The instant I heard what she said next, I called the police right away. I'm glad you're here. If you are watching this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are hearing my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I sat in my small kitchen, where I had just carefully prepared the dishes that my granddaughter, Sarah, always loved. Sarah is studying at Arizona State University. She lives in the student dorms. She hardly ever comes to visit me, so when she suddenly showed up at my front door this morning, I felt a mix of joy and concern. "Grandma, I missed you," she said softly, but her eyes were dull, like she was holding something back. I didn't press her for details. I rushed to the kitchen and checked the refrigerator to cook her a decent, comforting meal. I figured a warm, home-cooked meal would surely make her feel better. But when I brought the warm chicken noodle soup to the table and set it in front of Sarah, she just sat there, staring distractedly at the plate of white rice. She barely touched the food with her fork, picked up a small piece of mashed potato, brought it to her mouth, and then put it back down. Her face was pale, her lips chapped. There was none of the usual energy left in the girl who used to excitedly tell me about her days at college. I held back a sigh and, in a gentle voice, like I was trying to soothe a child, I said, "Sarah, honey, eat a little more. You're busy all day at school. I bet you aren't eating right." She pressed her lips together, forcing a weak smile, so fragile it broke my heart. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I honestly don't have an appetite." Her voice was low, as if saying those few words took a monumental effort. I looked at the plate, almost untouched, and felt an overwhelming anxiety growing inside me. For weeks now, every time she comes home, Sarah is exactly the same. The meals I prepare with so much love and care, she barely samples them and leaves them half-eaten. I silently collected the dishes, trying to hide the deepening worry that gripped me. What in the world was happening to my granddaughter? Late that night, when the faint moonlight streamed through the window, I went out to the yard to sweep up the dry leaves fallen from the bougainvillea. My small house on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet sanctuary in the middle of exhausting days. I held the broom and swept slowly, while my mind kept circling back to Sarah. Suddenly, a light shone from the kitchen door, illuminating a corner of the yard. I was startled to see Sarah bent over the bougainvillea pot. She was throwing up non-stop, her shoulders shaking as if her whole body was trying desperately to expel something. Then she quickly wiped her mouth with her hand and looked around, terrified someone might see her. "Sarah, are you sick?" I rushed toward her, my heart sinking. "Let me make you some hot herbal tea. It will help settle your stomach." I touched her shoulder, but Sarah gently pulled away, replying in a weak voice, "It's just a stomach bug, Grandma. I must have caught something." Her eyes avoided mine, as if concealing a terrible secret. I wanted to ask her more, but seeing her pale face, I could only nod, though inside me, a hot wave of panic began to rise. That night, I sat in my room with an old shirt half folded in my hands. The house was strangely silent, only the steady tick-tock of the clock could be heard. I tried to focus on every crease of the fabric, but my mind kept returning to Sarah. She wasn't all right. I knew it with absolute certainty. When did those clear eyes, which used to sparkle when she talked about her dreams, become so somber? I told myself I had to talk to her, to find out what was going on. And then, as if she had been listening to my thoughts, a soft knock sounded on the door. It opened slowly, and Sarah walked in. Her figure was fragile, like a dry leaf about to crumble. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her trembling hands tightly hugged a pillow, as if it were the only thing holding her up. I put the shirt aside. My heart was pounding hard, with the crushing certainty that something awful was about to be revealed. Sarah stood there, hesitating for a long, agonizing moment. Her lips moved, but not a single word came out. Finally, she let herself sink to the floor, her voice choked and broken, weak as the wind that slips through a crack. "Grandma, the truth is, I'm pregnant." I froze solid. The garment I had in my hand dropped to the floor, but I didn't even notice. My mind was reeling, searching for a reason, an explanation. I opened my mouth, ready to ask about Jason, Sarah's boyfriend, the boy I had seen a couple of times, the one she swore truly loved her. But before I could utter his name, Sarah desperately shook her head as tears poured down her face like rain. "No, it's not him. It's my stepfather." Those two words, my stepfather, were like a shard of ice stabbing into my heart. I was left breathless, with the horrifying sensation that my whole world was crashing down. Harold, the man my daughter Linda had married, the one I had believed was the family's salvation, the pillar of support for mother and daughter after so many tough years. How could it possibly be him? I stared at Sarah, wanting to say something, but my throat was completely constricted, as if a rock was lodged there, preventing me from speaking. Sarah knelt on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Her devastating sobs tore through the silence of the room. "Grandma, it happened so many times. I didn't dare tell anyone. He threatened to hurt Mom if I spoke up. He said no one would ever believe me." She buried her face in her hands, her fingers digging into her hair, as if trying to hide from the entire world. I couldn't endure it anymore. The sheer rage, the pain, and the overwhelming helplessness mixed inside me, making me tremble from head to toe. I rushed to her, knelt down, and embraced her fragile body. My own tears streamed out, joining those of my granddaughter. "Oh God, my poor child," I kept repeating, my voice shattered. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you have to carry this burden alone?" I held her tight in my arms, feeling every shaky breath from her chest. In that instant, I saw reflected the woman I had been, when I was young, when life had also pushed me into dark corners, places I thought I would never escape. But I survived, and I swore right then and there that I wouldn't let my granddaughter fall. "We have to go to the police immediately, Sarah," I said, my voice firm despite the tears still running. "Right away. I am not going to let him keep hurting you or anyone else." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear, but with a tiny spark of hope. She nodded, weakly. With trembling hands, I picked up the old telephone from the table, my grip slipping from sweat as I dialed the emergency number. The voice on the other end was monotonous, but I forced myself to maintain my composure and scheduled an appointment with the police for the following day at the precinct. When I hung up, I hugged Sarah again and whispered, "I'm right here. You don't have to be afraid. We'll face this together." The next morning, I sat quietly in the small patio of the house. The sunrise light spilled in golden flashes over the ground. That light was supposed to bring warmth and comfort, but that day it only made the heaviness in me feel worse. I looked at Sarah, my granddaughter, who was sitting in an old wooden chair next to the patio table, trying to drink the milk I had just prepared for her. Her hands were shaking, the bowl tilting, as if every sip were a battle. Her face was still pale, her eyes lost in a place I couldn't reach. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but again my throat closed up. I put the basket of vegetables on the ground, pretending to concentrate on separating each leaf of lettuce. But my mind had already travelled back to the past. Those days when I thought my family had finally found happiness. The memories returned with painful clarity, as if it had been yesterday. 20 years ago, Linda, my only daughter, entered her wedding with Robert at the old St. Michael's Chapel. I still perfectly remember the image of Linda in her simple white dress, the radiant smile on her face, and Robert, a good-hearted young man with hands roughened by work, was there, in a borrowed suit, with a sincere smile that lit up the whole corner of the church. The whole community came to give their blessing. Laughter and conversation filled the air, and although the place was humble, the atmosphere was genuinely warm. I was among the crowd, with tears of pure happiness silently falling. I thought my daughter had found a good man, someone who would protect her for the rest of her life. Their first years were like a dream. Every morning, Robert would put on his yellow hard hat, push his old motorcycle toward the construction site, and whistle a cheerful tune. When he returned in the evening, he always brought a little bag of candy for Sarah, who was then just a little girl with pigtails. I still remember Robert crouching in front of the porch, handing the candy to Sarah. The girl laughed, her eyes squinted, ran into his arms, and called him Daddy in a clear voice. That image was the greatest joy for me, the proof that even if life was tough, our family was filled with love. But that happiness was fragile, like the paper decorations in the yard, easily swept away by the wind. When Sarah turned 6 years old, a work accident took Robert away forever. The scaffolding on the job site collapsed, and he died instantly, without getting to say a final word. I remember that day. The sky was grey, and a drizzle was falling. Linda collapsed over the simple coffin, crying until she had no tears left. And Sarah, so small in her black dress, hugged her father's picture, her gaze vacant, not understanding why Daddy wasn't coming back. I was there, holding both of them, my heart shattered into pieces, and I could only whisper, "Everything will be all right. We will get through this together." The years that followed were a string of hard times. Linda struggled alone to raise Sarah. By day, she worked as an accountant in a small tailoring shop, and at night, she stayed up with more ledger books to earn extra money. I watched my daughter wear herself out little by little. Those eyes that once shone now only showed exhaustion. I helped in whatever way I could, watching Sarah or cooking to bring them meals. But no matter how hard we tried, I felt that our family was like a boat being dragged by the current, with nothing solid to hold on to. Until one day, Harold appeared. He entered Linda and Sarah's lives as a supposed savior, with his impeccable, elegant look, his white shirt neatly pressed, and his leather shoes gleaming. He was the CEO of the environmental company Clearwater, a man with power and money, very different from the simple men of the town. He pursued Linda relentlessly, brought her expensive bouquets of flowers, invited mother and daughter to fancy restaurants that we could only look at from the outside before. The neighbors started whispering. Linda is really lucky, a widow, and yet an executive notices her. I heard those comments, and I felt both joy and fear. Joy, because I thought that finally God was compensating my daughter, but fear, because Harold's eyes sometimes turned cold, as if hiding something I couldn't quite figure out. Sarah was barely 10 years old, still timid, and called him Uncle Harold. I remember she once told me, in an innocent voice, "Uncle Harold bought me a new backpack. It's really nice, Grandma." I smiled, stroked her hair, thinking that perhaps Harold genuinely wanted to be a good father. His wedding with Linda was celebrated lavishly at the most luxurious hotel in the city. Even the local news mentioned it. He had Sarah enrolled in a prestigious private school, something we had only dared to dream of before. Everyone said my daughter had found a good husband, a man capable of protecting the whole family. I, in my innocence, believed it too. I thought we had finally escaped poverty, that Linda and Sarah would live surrounded by care and security. But Sarah's confession last night demolished everything. The beautiful memories of a happy family were now nothing more than a ripped painting, exposing a terrible truth. Harold, the man I believed to be a benefactor, turned out to be a monster. I decided to prepare a pot of light oatmeal. The aroma of the rice, mixed with a little chopped chives, made me hope Sarah would manage to eat a few spoonfuls. The girl was sitting at the patio table, not eating anything but a few sips of milk. I brought the steaming bowl, placed it in front of her, forcing a gentle smile. "Sarah, eat a little oatmeal, even just a few spoonfuls, so you can have strength." But she just looked at the bowl. Her fork barely brushed the edge before she released it. Her face was paper white, her eyes swollen, as if the entire world had drained the life out of her. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I can't swallow," she whispered, so weakly that I had to lean in to hear her. I just nodded, hiding the pain that was tearing me apart inside, and silently took the bowl away. I put on my old, worn woolen shawl, the same one I had used for so many years, from when I cradled Linda as a baby to now with Sarah. Today, I took my granddaughter's hand and led her to the police precinct in the center of the town. The street in the morning was noisy and busy with motorcycles and street vendors, but inside me there was only a terrifying silence, as if everything were muffled by the sheer dread. Sarah walked beside me, her hand icy, squeezing mine, her thin shoulders trembling. I squeezed her hand hard and whispered to her, "Grandma is here. Don't be afraid. We're going to tell the whole truth." But she kept her gaze down, as if she wanted to disappear from the world. The precinct was on a corner, with its exterior walls painted a peeling white, and inside the atmosphere was stuffy and loud. Some farmers were waiting on wooden chairs to resolve land disputes, their loud voices mixed with tired sighs. A street vendor in the corner was crying, recounting how her old motorcycle had been stolen. I guided Sarah to the counter, where a middle-aged officer was listlessly leafing through a ledger, chewing gum. He looked at us with indifference. "What do you need?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to be steady, and told him everything, from Sarah's confession last night about how her stepfather, Harold Benton, had done terrible things. I spoke clearly, every word emphasized. "He abused my granddaughter more than once. My granddaughter is pregnant, and that is a consequence of what he did to her." The officer flinched, his pen frozen in the air. He looked at me. Then he looked at Sarah, a trace of confusion in his eyes. "Say that again. Did you say it's Mr. Harold Benton, the director of the Clear Water Company?" His voice dropped, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. I nodded firmly, feeling the anger burn in my chest. "That's right. It's him. I want to file a report, and I want justice for my granddaughter." Sarah, next to me, hugged her old backpack tightly, her swollen eyes fixed on the floor, as if a single glance from a stranger could make her shatter. The officer sighed, glanced at a colleague nearby, and then shook his head. Another officer, who seemed to be higher ranking, approached and tried to smile, but I only saw deceit in his expression. "Mrs. Mary," he said in a smooth voice, but one filled with calculation, "this is an extremely sensitive matter. Frankly, the best thing would be for you to go back home and discuss it with your family. Don't make a big fuss. It would be a huge embarrassment for everyone." An embarrassment? That word was like a direct stab to the heart. I stood up abruptly. I slammed my hand on the desk hard, and my voice trembled with fury. Embarrassment? What embarrassment can there be when my granddaughter, barely 20 years old, is carrying the blood of a monster? Do you people even have a conscience left? Suddenly the room fell silent. Some people turned to stare at us. The officer clicked his tongue, quickly wrote a few lines in his notebook, and closed it as if to dismiss the issue. The file will be sent to the superior authorities for review. You go back home. If there is anything, we will contact you later. His voice was monotonous, without an ounce of emotion, as if my words were nothing more than a passing breeze. I wanted to scream, to demand they act immediately, but seeing Sarah huddled next to me, I knew I had to save my strength to protect her. I took her hand, pulled her out of the precinct, my heart ripped apart by my helplessness. Outside, the sun was scorching with a suffocating heat that made me dizzy. Sarah walked, dissolved in sobs, those small whimpers that seemed to break the air. I held her fragile shoulders, trying to transmit a strength that I wasn't even sure I still possessed. I am not going to let this be swept under the rug, Sarah, I told her, my voice firm, even though my heart was shattering. We are going to find justice. She only nodded in silence, as tears streamed down her cheeks. We took a taxi back home. The driver, a middle-aged man with a face marked by the harshness of life, looked at us through the rear-view mirror. "Coming from the police station?" he asked with curiosity. I nodded, not wanting to talk, but he continued. "In this town, lawsuits are useless. Mr. Benton has already arranged everything, from the top down. Everyone here knows it." Every word of his was like a thorn digging into my chest. I remained silent, but a storm raged in my head. Sarah turned her face toward the window, letting the tears fall non-stop, as if wanting to hide her pain from the whole world. Upon arriving home, I prepared a glass of warm lemon water, hoping to give Sarah a little relief. I took the glass to her room, but she was still huddled in bed, hugging the pillow, not eating, not drinking, not saying a single word. I sat beside her, gently stroked her hair, my soul in pieces. "Rest. Everything is going to be fine," I murmured, although I didn't even believe those words myself. I barely slept that night, my mind full of unanswered questions. Could Harold, with his money and power, hide his crime forever? And Linda, my daughter, did she really know who her husband was? I picked up my old phone and dialed Linda's number. Her voice sounded on the other end of the line, sweet as always, but now so distant. "Mum, why are you calling me so late?" she asked. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "Linda, I need to see you. I'm coming to your house tomorrow, okay? It's something important about Sarah." She hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Yes, all right, Mum." I hung up with a heavy heart. I knew tomorrow's meeting wouldn't be easy, but I had to tell Linda the truth, even if that truth hurt to the core. The next morning I woke up early. The daylight filtered through the crack in the door, illuminating the old wooden floor. But it couldn't dissipate the coldness that covered my mind. Today I had to take Sarah to see Linda to tell her the whole truth. I knew that encounter wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't allow everything to remain buried in the darkness. I looked at Sarah, who was curled up in a corner of the room, her eyes still swollen after crying all night. "Get ready. We're going to your mum's house," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. She nodded, but her gaze was empty, as if a simple breath of wind would be enough to knock her down. We took the bus towards the affluent residential area where Linda and Harold lived in a luxurious mansion. The street leading to the neighborhood was paved and clean, with rows of perfectly manicured trees on both sides, very different from the dusty alley in front of my house. When the bus stopped, I took Sarah's hand and we got off, silently praying for the strength to face what was coming. Linda's mansion appeared before us, expansive and majestic, with a marble courtyard that shone under the sun. Harold's luxury car was parked under the porch, gleaming as if freshly polished. As soon as she saw it, Sarah started trembling, squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. "Grandma, I'm scared," she whispered, her voice choked. I pulled her toward me, stroking her back. "I'm here with you, Sarah. He can't hurt you anymore." I knocked on the door, my heart slamming against my chest. Linda came out to open it, dressed in an elegant Gucci dress, her lips painted deep red, her hair perfectly curled. She smiled, but her smile was distant, as if directed at a stranger and not her mother. "Mom, Sarah, why did you come without calling first?" she asked in a soft but slightly defensive voice. I didn't answer. I simply squeezed Sarah's hand and walked straight into the living room, ignoring all formality. The room was spacious, with a ridiculously expensive leather sofa and luxurious artwork on the walls. But to me it only felt cold. I sat down, looked Linda straight in the eye, and spoke with firm conviction. "Linda, we have to talk seriously. Harold did something terrible to Sarah. The girl is pregnant, and that is a consequence of what he did to her." Linda's face froze for an instant, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had just heard. Then suddenly she let out a burst of laughter, a cold, ironic laugh. "Mum, please don't be ridiculous. Sarah just broke up with Jason. Obviously it's his child, and now you're coming here to accuse someone else." Her voice was sharp, as if trying to shut down my every word. I felt my blood boil, but before I could respond, Sarah burst into tears, her voice trembling. "No, Mum. I swear to you, it was him. Harold. Jason and I never—" She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking into sobs. Slap! A loud slap echoed against Sarah's cheek, filling the silence of the room. Linda jumped up, her eyes wild and her face red with fury. "Shut up!" she screamed, her voice broken. "Do you dare to invent something like that to ruin this family? Do you have any idea what you're saying, Sarah?" I stood paralyzed, unable to believe that my own daughter could act that way. Sarah covered her face, tears falling uncontrollably, trembling like a leaf. I ran to her, hugged her tightly, and yelled at Linda. "Linda, have you completely lost it? She is your daughter, your own flesh and blood. How can you hit her just because she's telling the truth?" Linda stood there, her hands shaking and her eyes full of rage and disappointment. "Harold was the one who provided for this whole family," she shouted, her voice nearly breaking. "He was the one who paid for Sarah's ridiculously expensive private school, who gave us a life we could only dream of before. And what about you, Sarah? You're just a stubborn, rebellious girl, getting mixed up in foolish relationships. Do you dare to slander your stepfather?" Every word Linda spoke was like a knife tearing at my heart. I looked at my daughter, whom I had raised, for whom I had sacrificed everything, and now she was standing in front of me like a stranger, blinded by luxury and power, defending a man who didn't deserve it. Sarah buried her head in my shoulder, breathing in short, ragged gasps, her tears soaking my blouse. "Mum, you don't believe me," she whispered, her voice broken. I hugged her hard, feeling like the whole world was collapsing around me. At that moment, laughter and cheerful voices were heard from the patio. I looked out the window and saw some employees from Harold's company who had come to pick him up for a meeting. He came out, immaculate in his suit, and barely gave us a cold glance before calmly getting into the car. A phony smile remained on his face, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed my granddaughter's life. That sight made my blood boil, but I knew that wasn't the time to confront him. Linda turned back to me, pointing at the door with her finger, her voice freezing. "You two get out of my house immediately. I will not tolerate these disgusting lies in my home." I looked her straight in the eyes, searching for any trace of the little Linda from before, the girl who hugged me, crying when she lost her father. But facing me was only an unfamiliar woman, blinded by money and influence. I didn't say anything more. I just hugged Sarah and led her out of that cold mansion. On the way home, we took the bus. Sarah was huddled against me, tears falling silently. I squeezed her hand tight, trying to pass some strength to her, even though I was myself drowning in pain and fury. "I am not going to leave you alone, Sarah," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "Even if your mother doesn't believe you, I believe you, and I will do whatever is necessary to protect you." She didn't respond. She only nodded slowly, but her fingers gripped mine harder, as if I were her only support. When we got home, I prepared her a cup of hot tea and placed it in front of her. But she just sat there, staring out at the small patio where the bougainvillea swayed silently in the wind. I sat next to her, my heart breaking. I had lost a part of Linda the moment she chose to defend Harold instead of protecting her own daughter. But I swore to myself that from now on, I wouldn't let anyone hurt Sarah again, even if it meant confronting my own daughter. After Linda threw us out of that icy mansion, I decided that Sarah would stay and live with me. My small house on the outskirts of Phoenix wasn't anything special. The plastered walls were yellowed by the years, the roof shingles mismatched after so many heavy rains. It wasn't luxurious or glamorous like where Linda lived, but at least it was a haven of peace, where I hoped Sarah could regain a little light in her soul. I fixed up the room that had once been Linda's, put in a simple bed, and covered it with the wool blanket I had woven myself long ago. "Stay here with me, sweetie," I said, gently stroking her hair. She only nodded, her gaze vacant, as if there was no spark of life left inside her. But peace, for Sarah, seemed to have become an unreachable luxury. Every morning I got up early, cooked a pot of rice with a little fresh milk, and added some sugar to make it easier to eat. I brought it to the table, put it in front of Sarah, and tried to smile. "Eat a little, even just a few spoonfuls, so you can keep your strength up." But she just looked at the bowl, her fork softly touching the rim and then letting go. She would swallow a few spoonfuls and then turn her face away, her empty gaze fixed on the quiet patio in front of the house, where the bougainvillea swayed silently in the wind. "Grandma, I'm not hungry," she whispered, her voice so weak I had to strain to hear it. I could only nod, hiding the pain that tore me up inside, and collected the bowl in silence, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. I invited Sarah to the vegetable garden to pick vegetables, hoping that the fresh air and a little light work would distract her. "Come on, help me pick some lettuce. We'll make the salad you like this afternoon," I told her, trying to keep my voice cheerful. But Sarah just sat listlessly in the small wooden chair, her hands unconsciously crushing the tender lettuce leaves, her gaze lost as if she were traveling to a distant place. I looked at her and felt my heart contract painfully. The girl who used to excitedly tell me about her dreams of becoming a lawyer, of living vibrant days at college, was now nothing more than an empty shell, a prisoner of her own profound pain. One afternoon, while I was hanging laundry in the yard, I heard a noise in the bathroom. A terrible premonition told me something was very wrong. I ran inside, my heart pounding wildly. The scene chilled me to the bone. Sarah was standing, clutching a blister pack of abortion pills in her hands shaking and her eyes red with desperation. "Sarah!" I screamed, running towards her and snatching the pills away. "What are you trying to do?" My voice came out broken, a mixture of fear and fury. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, covering her face and crying uncontrollably. "I can't take this anymore, Grandma. I don't want to have this baby. He disgusts me. I disgust myself." Her crying tore through the air. Every word was like a knife in my heart. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, tears also running down my cheeks. "The baby is not to blame, Sarah," I whispered, my voice choked. "He is a part of you, and I will be here, carrying all of this with you." I held her for a long time, feeling every shaky breath, as if her whole body were fighting against an internal storm. I knew my words couldn't ease her pain, but I couldn't let my granddaughter destroy herself. "I promise you, you are not alone," I told her, squeezing her hand, even though I myself was drowning in helplessness. A few days later, I took Sarah to a gynecological clinic on the outskirts, where an older female doctor I had known for years worked. During the ride, Sarah barely spoke. She just huddled next to the bus window, hugging her stomach, avoiding looking at me. At the clinic, the doctor confirmed that the baby was already more than 3 months old. "The girl is stable, but she needs special care, both physical and emotional," she said in a grave voice. When she asked Sarah if she wanted to keep the baby, she remained silent and turned her face toward the cold wall, as if trying to escape the reality. I took her hand firmly and nodded in her place. "We will have the baby," I said with a firm voice, although inside I knew how many challenges that decision would bring. On the way back home, we passed by the city hall, where a group of students was marching, waving banners against corruption. The shouts of "Justice for the people" resonated through the square. Sarah suddenly lowered her head, clinging to me, as if afraid that the whole world would discover the secret she carried inside. "Don't be afraid, sweetie," I whispered, pulling her closer. "No one has the right to judge you." But I knew that Sarah's fear wasn't just of people's stares, but also of the weight growing in her womb, a weight she couldn't accept. That night, I woke up in the early hours to a faint noise. Sarah's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and the pale moonlight streamed through the crack, illuminating her small silhouette. Sarah was sitting alone in the darkness, one hand on her stomach, murmuring through sobs. "Why me? Why?" Her words were like knives in my heart. I wanted to go in and hug her, but my feet seemed stuck to the floor. I backed away silently, my soul torn. I didn't know what else to do, except that the next day I went back to the market. I bought more milk, more fruit, more vitamins to force her to eat. I only knew that I had to protect Sarah, and also the fragile life growing inside her. Time passed in silence. Sarah's belly grew bigger every day. Round under the loose shirts, I deliberately chose to hide it from the neighbors' curious glances. The girl hardly dared to leave the house, always shut up in her room, as if afraid that the whole world would discover the pain she carried. I understood that people's stares could be as sharp as knives, especially in a small town like Phoenix, where gossip traveled faster than the wind. Every time I took Sarah to the prenatal checkup, I wrapped her body in a large shawl, hoping to hide her a little from the inquisitive looks. "Walk close to me, sweetie," I would whisper, squeezing her hand tightly as we crossed the alley toward the bus stop. But Sarah just kept her head down. She walked like a ghost, her shoulders trembling under the shawl. I did everything I could to make Sarah's life a little more bearable. Every morning, I went early to the market, picked the freshest fruit, the greenest vegetables, hoping to cook something that would stimulate her appetite. I prepared milk, soups. I even tried to make flan, her favorite dessert from before, but Sarah would just shake her head, her gaze lost. "Grandma, I don't want to eat," she would say in a thread of a voice that I could barely hear. I would just nod, hiding the pain in my chest. But every time I looked at her, I felt my heart clench until it almost broke. My granddaughter, the same girl who used to talk non-stop about her dream of being a lawyer, was now nothing more than an empty shell, trapped in a pain that I couldn't share. The day Sarah went into labor, the sky opened up in a furious downpour. The drops slammed against the windows so hard that it seemed like they wanted to tear the world apart. I was in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I heard her groans from the room. "Grandma, it hurts so much," she called out, in a weak and frightened voice. I ran to her. I saw her hugging her stomach, her face pale, sweat covering her forehead. "Calm down, sweetie. I'm taking you to the hospital right now," I told her, trying to stay calm even though I was as agitated inside as the storm outside. I called a taxi. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped the papers as I put them in my bag. On the way to the hospital, Sarah squeezed my hand so hard that her nails dug into my skin until it hurt. "Grandma, don't leave me alone," she cried, between sobs drowned out by the roar of the rain. I hugged her and whispered to her, "I'm here, sweetie. I'm not going anywhere." In the delivery room, Sarah's screams echoed, heart-wrenching. I was by her side, tightly squeezing her hand, feeling every contraction through her clenched fingers. "Come on, Sarah, you are so strong," I encouraged her, even though tears were also streaming down my face. Silently I prayed, begging heaven not to let any more pain fall upon my granddaughter. After hours of tension, the baby was born, a tiny boy, but his crying was weak, fragile as a breath of wind. His little face was bruised, his eyes closed, and he didn't look like the healthy babies I had seen before. The doctor, an older man with a sad gaze, took me to a corner and murmured, "The baby has a congenital heart defect, ma'am. He's very delicate. He needs special care." His words were like a knife in my chest. I looked at the little one, so tiny he fit in just one of my arms, and I felt my soul break. Sarah, exhausted from the childbirth, turned her face away and refused to look at him. "I don't want to see him. I hate him," she cried out through tears. I froze, not knowing what to say. Trembling, I took the baby in my arms, held him against my chest. He was so cold, so fragile, that he seemed to vanish in my hands. I kissed his tiny forehead and whispered to him, "My grandson, your grandma is here. Don't be afraid." I rocked him, even though my heart was breaking into pieces. That child, even though he was born in the middle of pain, was still Sarah's blood, part of our family. In the days following Sarah's discharge, it was practically me who took care of the baby alone. I spent sleepless nights, preparing bottles, changing diapers, rocking him every time his crying became endless. His weak crying was like a silent plea in the darkness. Sarah just lay there, on her back, staring at the wall, not saying a word. Once I saw her secretly, watching the baby in the crib from afar, with a look full of hatred and at the same time, unbearable sadness. "Grandma, I can't," she murmured on one occasion, leaving the sentence unfinished, as tears ran down her face. One night, the baby cried non-stop, until his crying faded and he fell silent. Desperate, I lifted him and felt his little body icy cold, his lips purple. "Sarah, hurry! Come!" I cried out, my voice broken by fear. I ran out into the rain, with the baby in my arms, heading to the hospital. But upon arriving, the doctor shook his head, his voice full of compassion. His heart was too weak. We did everything possible. I collapsed in that cold room, crying out loud, hugging the now lifeless little body. Sarah broke down in a chair, covering her head with her hands, and between sobs, she said, "Everything, everything is my fault. The burial was simple in a small cemetery on the outskirts of the town. It was just Sarah, me, and Father Michael, an elderly priest I had known for years, saying some prayers. The sky was grey. The icy wind blew strongly, carrying away the little warmth left in my chest. Sarah's white mourning veil fluttered in the air like a silent farewell. I watched as they covered the small grave, clenching my hands until they hurt. Sarah was by my side, tearless, but with an empty gaze, as if a part of her soul had gone with the child. After the burial, Sarah sank completely. She spent her days locked in her room, curled up under an old wool blanket, her gaze lost on the ceiling. I brought her a bowl of hot soup, sat next to the bed, and tried to convince her as if I were talking to a small child. "Sarah, please eat a little, even one spoonful." She shook her head, her voice weak. "Grandma, I don't want to." I put the soup aside and stroked her hair, my soul utterly broken. I knew that the pain of having lost her son had shattered her heart, and that no matter how hard I tried, I could never fill that void. Every day I was only left with the patience to feed her spoonful by spoonful, hoping that this small gesture would keep her with me, even if it were just a shadow. One weekend morning, I decided to go to the farmer's market to buy some rice and vegetables. I thought a simple but comforting home-cooked meal might make Sarah feel better. The market in Phoenix was always full of people, with vendors' voices, bargaining, and laughter mixing in a noisy but lively symphony. I walked among the colourful stalls, trying to concentrate on choosing bunches of fresh vegetables, but my heart remained heavy. The image of Sarah curled up in her room haunted me, like a thorn stuck in my chest. While I was at the corn stand, I casually overheard the conversation of some neighbours. One of them, with her hair pulled back in a high bun, whispered as if afraid someone would hear her. "My daughter works at the Clear Water Company. She says that Director Harold is terrible. He's always making unwanted advances toward the female employees, and no one dares to speak up. Anyone who says something loses their job." Another woman, with the basket of fish in her hand, intervened indignantly. "That's not all. That man's company is also dumping untreated sewage into the river. Many people in the area have developed skin diseases, and those who try to file a lawsuit, he silences them with money." I stood motionless, tightly clutching the bunch of vegetables, pretending to be focused on my purchase. But in reality, I was listening to every single word. Those phrases lit a fire inside me, a mix of rage and hope. It turned out that Sarah was not Harold's only victim. He was a monster, and the whole town knew it, but no one dared to speak. I kept walking toward the corner of the market, where a group of young people was gathered, live streaming with their phones. A girl, her voice full of passion, shouted, "We need justice! The Clear Water Company is poisoning our river, and Harold Benton must be held accountable for it." The people around applauded. Some held up handwritten signs. "Protect the environment. Protect the future." I watched them from a distance, my heart beating rapidly. A spark of hope began to light up inside me. If those young people dared to raise their voices, perhaps Sarah and I were not alone. I walked over to the fish stall, where the strong smell mixed with the market's humidity. There I ran into Martha, an old friend who had once worked at Harold's company. She had retired some time ago, but the marks of years of struggle were still visible on her face. Recognizing me, she led me to a secluded corner and whispered close to my ear. "Mary, I already heard about Sarah. I went through the same thing with that man. He called me to his office, locked the door. I was lucky to escape, but afterwards I had to leave the job. Everyone is terrified of him. No one dares to report him." Her voice trembled, as if that memory was still an open wound. I just nodded in silence, my heart heavy with realization. It wasn't just Sarah, there were many more. Women who didn't have the strength to confront him. I left the market with the basket in my hand, walking with heavy steps along the dirt road that led home. The words of Martha and the neighbors echoed in my mind. Passing near a group gathered at the market entrance, I managed to hear. It's already circulating on the internet. People are collecting online signatures for the Environmental Protection Agency to investigate clear water. I stopped to look at a young woman taping a flyer to the wall. On it was a photo of the blackened river and a message. Harold Benton, give us back our clean river. I squeezed the basket handles tightly. My heart was pounding. Sarah and I weren't the only ones who knew the truth. Maybe, finally, justice was finding its way to us. That night, Sarah and I sat in front of the old television, the one I had bought more than 10 years ago, with the screen blurred by time. The presenter's voice boomed, cutting through the silence of the room. Numerous complaints have been sent to superior authorities in Washington, D.C., demanding an exhaustive investigation against the Clear Water Company and director Harold Benton. Images appeared on the screen of the river, turned into a black surface, dead fish floating belly up, and furious residents holding up signs. I glanced sideways at Sarah and saw her squeezing my hand tightly. Her eyes trembled, but shone with a faint ray of hope. "Grandma, they're talking about him," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I squeezed her hand, holding back my emotion. "Yes, sweetie, maybe justice is getting closer." The next day, the atmosphere in the town was buzzing. I was in the yard when I heard police sirens in the distance. Patrol cars and reporters surrounded the entrance to the Clear Water offices, just a few blocks from my house. People crowded around like it was a festival, holding up handwritten signs. "Give us back the clean river," and Harold Benton must answer for his actions. From a distance, I watched the shouting crowd, my heart divided between pain and hope. Those people weren't just fighting for the river, they were also fighting for victims like Sarah, those whom Harold had trampled in the darkness. I wanted to take Sarah to see, but she shook her head, hiding behind the door in a low voice. "I'm scared, Grandma. I don't want anyone to see me." I hugged her and whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. I'll be right here." The local station broadcast an interview with Inspector Miller, head of the investigation. He appeared on television, in his impeccable uniform, responding in a smooth voice. "We have conducted a preliminary inspection and have not found any serious irregularities." I felt the blood rush to my head, my hands gripping the arm of the couch until they hurt. They hadn't found anything. What was he talking about? When the whole town knew the river had died because of Harold's company? Sarah, next to me, her gaze darkened again, as if the newly lit spark of hope had been extinguished. "Grandma, they're not going to do anything," she murmured, lost. I wanted to comfort her, but my throat closed up and I couldn't utter a word. But just a few hours later, like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky, a short video appeared on social media, which spread with incredible speed. I don't understand much about technology, but the girl from the market showed it to me on her phone. The video, taken from surveillance cameras inside the precinct, showed Inspector Miller receiving a thick envelope from Harold, while both laughed like old friends. "Do you see, Mrs. Mary?" the girl said with outrage. "Even the police are compromised." I felt my heart pounding, caught between rage and a strange relief. The truth, finally, had come to light, even if it was just a piece of it. The news of the video agitated the whole town. I heard people talking about it everywhere, from the corner coffee shop to the small grocery store. If even the local police are corrupt, surely the higher authorities will step in, said an old man at the fresh drink stand, with evident anger. I stayed among the crowd, listening, with a strange feeling in my chest. Hope and fear at the same time. If even the local police were on Harold's side, could we really fight him? But then I thought of Sarah, of those nights when she cried inconsolably in her room, and I knew I couldn't surrender. Just as expected, only a few days later, a committee of interagency inspectors from Washington, D.C. appeared. They arrived suddenly, without prior notice, surprising the whole town. I was in the yard, watching as the official vehicles stopped in front of the Clear Water Company. I saw them shut down the plant, take samples of wastewater, and demand all the accounting ledgers. Local television filmed the moment the police asked Harold to come in for questioning. He was still wearing his perfectly ironed white shirt. He still tried to maintain a false smile. But I noticed the sweat on his forehead and a flash of panic in his gaze. He's terrified, I thought, and for the first time, I felt a slight sense of relief. The press began to uncover a series of cases. It turned out that the Clear Water Company had paid several fines to evade inspections, and all the files were covered up by Inspector Miller and a group of local officials. Every article, every newscast was like a dagger against the veil of corruption that Harold had created. I read with a painful heart and full of rage. He hadn't just harmed Sarah. He had also poisoned the river, the lives of so many people in this community. That night, Sarah and I were in the patio, looking towards the central square. The neighbors had organized a vigil with candles, illuminating a part of the sky. The flames flickered like small stars in the darkness, reflecting in my granddaughter's eyes. Sarah took my hand and whispered, "Grandma, maybe justice really is coming." I hugged her, tears running down my face. "Yes, sweetie, I believe it too." The news of Harold's preventative arrest spread like wildfire, shaking all of Phoenix. I heard people commenting everywhere, from the corner market to the neighborhood cafe, all with voices full of indignation and hope. The day of the trial, I woke up with the first light, my heart restless. I called Sarah, who was huddled in her room, her eyes still swollen after so many nights without sleep. "Sweetie, today is an important day. We're going to the courthouse, okay?" I said, trying to sound gentle. She nodded, but there was an immense weight in her eyes, as if every step was a burden. I squeezed her hand, trying to transmit the little strength I was trying to gather myself. We arrived early at the city courthouse, amidst the crowd that was gathering at the entrance. The atmosphere was boiling, like a contained flame about to erupt. People held up handwritten signs, "Justice for the victims," and "No more monsters disguised as good men." Seeing those words, I felt a strange mix, pain for what Sarah had lived through, and at the same time the hope that justice would finally be done. Sarah pressed against me, her icy hands trembling in mine. "Grandma, there are too many people. I'm scared," she murmured. I stroked her back and replied in a low voice, "I'm with you, sweetie. Today, he will have to face the truth." When the police brought Harold out of the van, the crowd erupted in shouts of fury. He was wearing a grey prison uniform, his hair messy, his face pale, with no trace of that elegant director from before. Several people threw rotten eggs and mud at him amidst a wave of boos. I looked at him and saw how his former arrogant gaze now hid, avoiding the eyes of the people. He's trembling with fear, I thought, and a corner of my heart felt relieved, although the pain was still there, like a wound that never heals. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was so tense that it was almost stifling. The place was spacious, with rows of gleaming wooden benches, completely packed with people. I sat next to Sarah, feeling her shaky breathing. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a harsh, cutting voice, stood up to read the long indictment. The crimes were enumerated one by one: abuse against women, bribery of officials, and severe environmental pollution. Every word he pronounced fell like a hammer blow, sinking the entire room into absolute silence. I squeezed Sarah's hand and felt hers cling with more force, as if she were holding on to me so as not to collapse. One after another, the witnesses took the stand. First was Martha, an old friend of mine, who walked slowly but firmly. She recounted how Harold had called her to his office, locked the door, and tried to force himself on her. I was lucky to escape, but I lost my job and also my dignity, she said in a broken voice. Next came a young secretary, her eyes red, recounting the times Harold abused his power to harass her. Then came the labourers who had worked at Clearwater, each with their own story, but all agreeing on the same thing. Harold was a monster disguised as a man. I listened with a heavy heart, thinking of Sarah, of all those months of silence that she had to endure. It came to Sarah's turn. I felt her whole body tremble when she heard her name. "You can do this," I whispered, squeezing her hand one last time before she went up to the stand. She wore a simple white blouse, her hair pulled back, and her face was pale, although there was a new firmness in her gaze that I had never seen before. She began to speak, her voice initially trembling. "I am the daughter of his wife. I suffered horrible things from that man for a long time." The room fell silent, as if holding its breath. Her voice grew stronger. "And I got pregnant. I had his child, but the baby died from a congenital heart condition." Her declaration resonated clearly, strongly, like a blade cutting through the air. The courtroom erupted. Some burst into tears. A murmur swelled among the crowd. Harold suddenly jumped up, ready to shout his innocence. "She's lying. I didn't do anything." But the judge banged the table with the gavel and ordered firmly, "Silence is required in the courtroom." I looked at Sarah, filled with a painful pride. My granddaughter, the same one who once huddled fearfully in a corner, was now standing up, confronting the monster who destroyed her life. I wanted to run and hug her, but I could only stay there, letting the tears run silently. In that instant, I saw Linda, my daughter, sitting in the last row. Her face was drawn and hollow, with no trace of the haughty woman who once wore Gucci dresses. Her eyes were red, and she looked at Sarah with pain and deep regret. At the end of the session, when people began to leave, Linda approached me, her hands trembling. "Mom, Sarah, forgive me," she said through sobs, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was too blind to believe him. I was wrong." I looked her straight in the eye, feeling my soul ripped open. "Your words reopen old wounds. When you slapped Sarah, when you chose to defend Harold instead of protecting your own daughter, my granddaughter almost lost her entire life because of your blindness," I replied in a cold voice, laden with pain. "As of today, I no longer have a daughter named Linda." Linda collapsed, crying inconsolably on the bench, but I couldn't stay. I turned and hugged Sarah, feeling her body shaking in my arms. "You did an amazing job," I whispered, hiding my own tears. The trial concluded with a just sentence. Harold received the maximum possible sentence, along with several corrupt officials who were also prosecuted. Justice, although delayed, had finally arrived. After the trial, my granddaughter's life and mine slowly began to find their rhythm again, although the scars on Sarah's heart remained. I tried to do everything possible to give her some peace. Every morning I cooked simple meals, watered the chrysanthemum pots in the patio, and told her funny stories from my youth to cheer up the atmosphere. Sometimes Sarah would smile, but that smile was fragile, like a breeze that passes and easily vanishes. I knew that to heal, we needed time, and perhaps also those small miracles that life provides. One afternoon, while I was watering the chrysanthemums and the golden light fell over the patio, making the petals shine, a knock was heard at the door, gentle but firm. I wiped my hands on my apron. I went to open it and was surprised to see Jason, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, standing there. He wore a simple blue shirt, held a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, and his eyes looked tired, but sincere. "Mrs. Mary," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "I'm so sorry for having left when Sarah needed me most. I truly didn't know anything. I honestly thought she had broken up with me because she no longer had feelings for me. After reading everything in the newspaper, I finally understood that I was wrong. I want to be here, by her side, if she'll let me." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of warmth and deep distrust. This boy had been the one Sarah loved, but also the one who abandoned her in her most difficult moment. "Are you serious, Jason?" I asked him with a serious voice. "Sarah has been through way too much pain. If you're not absolutely serious, don't hurt her again." Jason nodded, his gaze firm. "I swear it, Mrs. Mary. I want to make things right." I smiled, feeling relieved, and then called inside. "Sarah, come here for a moment, sweetie." Sarah came out slowly, her eyes widening when she saw Jason. She stood motionless, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. And then, suddenly, she started to cry. Jason didn't say much. He just gently placed the bouquet of flowers in her hands and murmured in a warm voice, "Sarah, not all men are like him. You deserve to be truly loved." She didn't answer. She simply hugged him tightly, crying inconsolably. I stayed there, watching them, my heart filled with sadness, but also with hope. In Sarah's tear-filled eyes, I saw a tiny light shining after so many months of darkness, like a candle that had just been lit. A few weeks later, I decided to take Sarah to see a psychologist downtown. I knew that the wounds she carried inside wouldn't heal just with time or with love. The sessions were in a small room, with soft light and the gentle scent of lavender oil. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a warm voice, encouraged Sarah to express everything she had kept silent. At first, Sarah remained quiet, but little by little she began to open up, even if it was just in short phrases. "I feel like I'm not myself anymore," she told me once on the way back, her voice full of pain. I took her hand and whispered to her, "You are still your grandma's Sarah, much stronger than you think." At the same time, I enrolled Sarah and myself in a community women's support group called New Light. It was an association created by women who had been through suffering, from domestic violence to abuse, and they met to cook for charity, share their stories, and help each other heal. The first time we went, Sarah was shy. She stayed in a corner, listening to the others share their journeys. I noticed how her gaze slowly changed, from fear to curiosity, and then to a little bit of empathy. "Grandma, I'm not the only one," she told me at the end of the meeting, her voice soft but full of emotion. At one group meeting, while everyone was preparing casseroles for the needy children, an older woman suggested that each person share a story to inspire the others. I looked at Sarah, thinking she would refuse as always. But unexpectedly she stood up, her hands trembling but her gaze firm. "My name is Sarah," she began, her voice still a little shaky. I was abused by my stepfather for a long time. I got pregnant, I had a baby, but he died from a congenital heart condition. I thought I couldn't go on living, but today I'm here to say that I won't let that pain define me. The entire room fell silent, and then a wave of warm applause erupted. The women stood up, hugged Sarah. Some were crying, others smiling. I, sitting in the back rows, felt the tears running down my cheeks. For the first time since the tragedy, I saw my granddaughter hold her head high, speak with a clear voice, no longer with that tremor of fear. I was proud, but more than anything, I knew that Sarah was rediscovering herself, step by step. That night, on the way home, the sky was clear and the silver moon shone softly. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered to me, "Grandma, I'm going to keep pushing forward, not just for me, but also for other women, for those who have gone through the same thing as me." I stopped, hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her fragile body. "You are my light, Sarah," I said, my voice choked, "and I believe you will be a light for many more people." When we arrived home, I stayed in the patio, watching how the moon illuminated the fully bloomed chrysanthemum pots. I thought about the days of pain, about the great-grandson we lost, about Linda, the daughter I once loved, and who was now just a distant memory. Harold and those like him took too many things from us, but looking at Sarah, I understood that they could never tear the light from our hearts. I took my granddaughter's hand, and we walked into the house together, our hearts filled with a new certainty. No matter how dark the past has been, the light always finds a way to shine. Life taught me that staying silent in the face of evil only gives it more power, and that true love is not about covering up or enduring in silence, but having the courage to stand up and protect those we love. Family can break, hearts can change, but justice and truth will always come out into the light in the end. I want to tell everyone, never turn your back on the pain of your loved ones. Do not allow a false sense of honor to silence the voice of your true conscience. Believe in the power of truth. Fight until the end for justice, because only then can we give others a fair life and the certainty that good, although delayed, will always prevail. And for those who dedicate themselves to evil, remember that no amount of power, money, or cover-ups can hide your crimes forever. Evil may reign in the darkness, but sooner or later the light will expose it, and then the price will be much higher than you ever imagined. The story you have just heard has changed names and locations to protect the identity of those involved. We tell it not to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your own voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that illuminates someone else's path. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will lead us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most cherished stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.